All right, well, thank you all for bearing with us. I've always been interested in turtles pretty much my whole life. And I've always, really loved the snapping turtles. I've always kind of felt like they were the underdogs of the turtle world. They just always get like the worst rep. Everybody's getting eaten by alligator snapping turtles, everything, they've always gotten like the worst rap in the turtle worlds, and anything that opens up their mouth is clearly a snapping turtle. I can't tell you how many people will send me a picture of like a stink pot or a three-stripe mud with its mouth open there. Look at this snapping turtle. I'm like, well, technically it is snapping, but it's not quite a snapping turtle. But all right, how about the next slide? So here in Florida, we actually have 3 different types of snapping turtles. We have the Florida snapping turtle. Some differences in the Florida snapping turtle versus a common snapping turtle is the Florida snapping turtles have the spikes on their neck, and they're kind of like more like sought after. They recently kind of dumped them all into one thing, and it was probably more because nobody could tell what they were when they were looking at them. So the common snapping turtles are found all over North America. I don't believe that they have them naturally like occurring in like California, but almost in just about every other state they are. They are a good size turtle. They can get up to about like 18 inches in shell length, I believe, and at least like 35 pounds. They have wicked sharp nails, pretty strong beaks. They're actually very powerful like swimmers, but they're also even better at walking. So like I just recently spent the weekend up in Weeki Wachee on the river, and every morning that we were there, we would see the snapping turtles just walking along. Now it was like current that would try to drag you away, and here these giant snapping turtles are just like walking along the bottom, like, somebody walking down the sidewalk. So they're very powerful animals. They are for the most part nocturnal, which is why we really don't come across a lot of them during like, daytime hours. Next. The alligator snapping turtle, you would think that is the most common turtle in the state of Florida, but typically they start to occur like in like, say like Gainesville and north of Gainesville is where you typically find the alligator snapping turtles. Alligator snapping turtles kind of prefer like rivers and streams with current, where your commons and your Floridas will actually like take to like ponds and stuff like that. Next. Just one of my snapping turtles coming to take a peek and see what we're doing. They're very inquisitive animals. Next. Just a funny slide. So I do talk to a lot of people about turtles. So most of the snapping turtles that I'm working with came through different rescues that I work with. Most of the animals are usually unreleasable. A lot of times what will happen is my friend Amanda, she'll get the animals after the vets put them back together, and then she nurses them back to health over 6 months. And then by the time they're ready for release, they're so imprinted on humans that they're no longer afraid of them. And the fear has always been that if we were to put the animals back into a local pond, the first person that they saw, they would come up and try to climb up their leg for attention, and the person would clearly probably beat them to death with a stick. So, next. I was fortunate enough about 7 years ago, and this has actually kind of been one of my latest nightmares in my life. Through the rescue, they knew that I wanted to get an alligator snapping turtle so that I can use it for educational purposes and stuff like that. And I really wanted one probably about like 8-inch shell length. What I wound up getting is one that was like 42 inches in shell length. And then if you throw the tail and the head and everything on there, you've got a 4-foot turtle that's 80 pounds. And it's cool. And it really, this animal has been in captivity since the it's been in captivity for 50 years as a captive bred hatchling. It did originally have a girl with it, but a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with the bigger snapping turtles, you can't keep them together when you're not breeding them, because the male will try to breed all the time, and he had promptly drowned his female that he was with. So wound up getting a phone call through the rescue, and they said that they had this turtle that it's been in captivity for 50 years. The guy was basically selling everything and then moving in with his family. I could tell that the guy had some serious health issues going on, and that was probably the biggest reason why he was getting rid of everything. So didn't have anything to do with the reptile community or anything like that. So I go out there with my friends, Kim Swamp Girl, her husband Charles, and then their two daughters. We bail out most of the pond to get this. This is what the guy had originally put on. I want to say it was like a pet finder's website, and he basically said that the animal was unreleasable because it doesn't know anything but captivity. The guy did feed him like turkey necks and just like too much food and way too fatty of a food for an animal that just kind of sits idle and doesn't do too much. But this was one of the first pictures that I saw of him. I was pretty excited about getting them. I've seen them, worked with them here and there, but never owned my own. So next slide. As you can see that it's a decent sized animal. This was when we went to pick it up in Ocala. And the guy that I got it from had him for 25 years. And then he got him from a guy that had him for 25 years. So this is my friend Amanda. I do a lot of stuff with her just because she does all kinds of gopher tortoise rescue and stuff like that. And she also does a lot of aquatic turtles too. So she's the one that gets the turtles after they've been hit by cars and they can't be released back into the wild until they're all healed up. So Amanda is the one that originally reached out to me saying that she had that snapping turtle. And then Kim Swamp Girl and family, came out to help me with getting the animal. I thought it was going to fit into this big dog cage that I wound up having to take apart, put the animal in it, and then put the cage back together. It was just a lot bigger than what I was expecting. Next slide. This is just a Swamp Girl. She's done talks for a lot of the different clubs. I'm sure she's probably done one for this club. And basically anything that they can do to, help animals. So I know like right now they're releasing a lot of snapping turtles and snapping turtle babies. For the last 2 months, the males have been out cruising around looking for females, so they get hit. Then the girls come out to lay eggs, and then unfortunately they get hit. So, it's a very busy time for people that are doing turtle and tortoise rescue because everything seems to be moving with the warmer weather. Next slide. This was some of the stuff that I, when we went to pick up Allie. So that's Charles was the first one in the pond to get it. I was thankful for that. So, but as you can see, Allie's a good sized tortoise. So I've had Allie now for several years. I finally get the paperwork and they're telling me that it's past due. And I'm like, if you would have sent it to me in the first place, which is what I've been asking you to do for the last 5 years, this wouldn't be an issue. So hopefully they're going to let me, keep Allie, but it's a federally protected animal. So I have an educational permit, which allows me to keep her. I show her off to everybody that comes out to the ranch. And I'm hoping that when we do finally go back to having regular meetings, that one of my favorite things to do is always have like a huge Christmas party every year at my house. And we've had 50 or 60 people in my 1,000 square foot house. So I think we could do a lot better with my 2,700 square foot house, for a party. And then, just get to see all the animals that I'm working with. But absolutely love having Allie. Definitely, a conversation starter when you pull an animal out of the pond that's, 80 pounds and 4 foot long. Everybody's like, that is not what I was expecting, so, but Allie's cool. And I really do hope that we finally do get all the paperwork. That was me saying, please don't bite that hose in half. It's the only one I have, so, and he could easily do that.
How big do they get?
I want to say I went to the Pocono Snake Farm and they had one that was like over 200 years old. It was like at least like 100.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I was turning away. The Pocono Snake Farm has one that's like well over 100 pounds and almost like 200 years old.
And how wide?
It's huge. Probably 4.5, 5 foot.
Wow.
It's a big, big animal. Next. It's my buddy Mark Randall. As I said, when I have people come over to the house, part of the permit that, I have to use them as an educational tool. So I always like to pull them out and talk about different stuff. This was when I was kind of getting all the paperwork right to make sure that I could keep Allie. And I didn't want to make a huge pond and everything else. And at one point I was planning on digging a huge cement pond and putting it in. And then when I saw how little the animal moves around and does anything, he's in his enclosure for 5 years. And I don't think I've ever seen him out of the water. He'll come in, he'll like hang his hands on the edge of it and lift himself up, but that's it. Never comes out of the water on their own. So next. This is at my old job. This time of year, I'm constantly on the lookout for turtles. Can you turn the volume down on the video? I don't know if well, you'll just hear me talking at the end of it. That's very typical of when I go and pick up a snapping turtle of any size. I was just in Alligator Alley last weekend, and I had picked up one that was probably about like maybe 6 inches, where that was just like a little 4-inch guy. So, but anytime that I see them, I always try to get them out of the roads and into a safe place. And, there's different things that I would do. So like a little one like that, I may just, walk up and grab it really quick. If it's a bigger one, I tell people, I'll grab it by the very base of the tail and I'll carry it. But I'm also supporting the bottom of the tortoise's shell or the turtle shell so that they can't break the vertebrae in their tail or anything like that. And anybody that just, basically has them up in the air and is swinging them around, that's not going to do anything good to help the turtle. You just want to grab him by the base of the tail and then support his belly while you're walking him to the opposite side of the road that, he was kind of going in that direction. A lot of times you'll see the snapping turtles out on the roads like after heavy rains. I think the rains disorient the turtles, and that gets them stuck in the middle of the road where they don't know what's going on. The little one that I found last week, his shell was very dry, so I could tell that even though he was really on the edge of the water, he was probably out of the water for a good hour or so. And then in the sun here in Florida, it definitely disorients the animals. So basically for anything that's bigger than 6 inches, I basically walk over, I lightly step on the turtle's shell on the top of it. I'm not jumping on it or anything like that. Enough pressure on it so that I can safely grab the animal without the animal turning on me. This isn't me making a YouTube video or anything like that, trying to showboat. I don't want to get bit by one of these animals. They take big chunks of skin out of you. So nothing I want to experience in my life. Next. I can say that I've been pretty fortunate that I've seen snapping turtles in Mexico, and I also was able to find one in Costa Rica. And the best part about the one in Costa Rica was the guy that was in Costa Rica didn't even know they had snapping turtles there. So he was pretty amazed when we found it. Next slide. So this is us. We're wandering around on his like 10 acres of property. He's got a big pond in the middle of it. He had been there for at least 10 years and had never seen a snapping turtle. And then the one night that we showed up, we actually found this snapping turtle, a fer-de-lance on his property, red-eyed tree frogs, and then also a coral snake. So what was neat with this guy was he did have a lot of the spikes that the Florida snapping turtles have on their shell, but on their skin on their neck. And then its shell was almost like a black polished marble, unlike any like snapping turtle shell that I've ever seen. But Costa Rica is a great place to go and visit, and they do have a lot of different types of turtles. So they do have a lot of our turtles there that we have. So they have sliders there, they have mud turtles, they have musk turtles, they have the snapping turtles, they have all the different sea turtles. And I can say that when I was there, I did volunteer sea turtle work. So always a very cool place to go. And I've always recommended, if you do go to a Costa Rica or a place like that, don't try and stay at the newest resort. You want to kind of stay at the older ones that are kind of like run down and more family owned, because you can get away with doing more stuff like wandering around on the property in the middle of the night to look for all the really cool stuff. Keeping snapping turtles. Next. I do a lot of my turtles and tortoises in different types of tubs and different setups. I have found that these work really well. If you sink them into the ground, they work perfect. I just had a female about 2 weeks ago lay her first clutch of eggs. Unfortunately, I realized she had laid her eggs after I found 4 eggs in the water. After that, we started digging around and we found the rest of them. But sometimes they lay them in the water. And if you get them quick enough, I say incubate them, just because a lot of times they will drown if they've been in there for any amount of time. Next. These 300-gallon Rubbermaid totes work really good. I also use the 150s for a pair. This is a very typical, very simple setup. These are cattle troughs that are basically sunk in. You want to try and make them as level as possible so that you don't get a lot of sand being brought in there, and then you don't want like the rain washing all the sand in. So usually I do it about an inch above ground level. And then I also put a couple of cinder blocks in the bottom of it to make sure that the females can get out of the water if they need to with the males on their back. A lot of turtle species, if they don't have a way to get away from the males, then you need to make sure that they won't drown by the male just insistingly constantly breeding them. Next. That was Allie's setup. I had originally planned on digging that whole area out and making a huge cement pond for her or him. And then when I realized how little he kind of moves, they're really just ambush hunters that sit on the bottom of rivers, and with their mouth open, they have a little pink worm on the end of their tongue. They wiggle it, and fish think that they're going to get food. And then they basically wind up walking right into the jaws of the turtle. But that's Allie, and out of all the time that I've had Allie, I've never seen him climb out of the water, where my commons and my Florida snapping turtles will come out. If you give them like areas to bask and just run around on the grass, you will see them out quite often. Next. That's just a tortoise enclosure, just a side view. I use a lot of the corrugated roofing material as my enclosure material. It is very sharp, so if I was to do it all over again, I would definitely wrap the top of it in a 2x4. I do use it a lot to cut vegetables. So like if I have like a case of zucchini, I just sit there and I whack it against the fence, and it chops it up nicely for the tortoises to eat. Next slide. At my house, I have my 3 sets of Florida snapping turtles set up in this particular enclosure that you're looking at. So there's 1.1, and then to the right of that, there's another 1.1, and then next to that, there's another 1.1. And that seems to work really well with my snapping turtles. Next. Just some more. I do bury the metal a little bit into the ground to discourage digging and stuff like that. But if you know the animals, snapping turtles aren't very good diggers, but they are very good climbers. Climbers. Yeah. I find them in the other one's water all the time. You know, you go and you put them up 1.1 in each enclosure, and you come back and there's two females with a male in this one and one by themselves. They just kind of go and visit their friends. Just me more of setting them up. Next slide. Next slide. Definitely worth spending the time to make sure that they are level, just because if not, the rain will wash a lot of sand into the buckets. Something else I do that I don't do for a lot of my other turtles is that when I take them out and I like drain their ponds to clean them, I usually take a scoop of the green water out and then put it on the side. And then when I'm done cleaning, I take that green water and I dump it back in there. It just starts the algae like over again. And that keeps the turtles from seeing each other all the time. If snapping turtles especially, they can be aggressive if they want. And if they don't see each other and they're just kind of feeling each other walking around in the bottom there, they won't mess with each other. But if they see each other all the time, they can get very aggressive. So I always put some of the original dirty water back in to start that algae bloom all over again. And then, like I said, making sure that it's level is just going to make sure like cleanup and everything else is going to be a lot better. You don't want to have one side shallow and one side deep because it's kind of all crooked.
How do you take the water out?
I have either buckets or I've tried doing pumps and stuff like that. I just haven't found the right pump. So basically I got a Harbor Freight pump and it's only like hooks up to a 3/4 inch hose. And with the leaf litter and all the different stuff that falls in the ponds, it just wasn't good because it kept getting jammed up. So basically what I'd like to do is get like a 2-inch pump or something like that, that the leaf litter will be able to go through. But until then, I usually just do it with a bucket.
And
And
how often do you do that?
usually like once a month.
Oh,
They're constantly getting rain in there. I'm constantly topping them off. And then you can just stick the garden hose in there. And then like you basically, if you put it all the way to the bottom, it kicks up everything on the bottom and then it just kind of floats it out
right.
of the pond. And as long as you have that 1-inch lip above the dirt, it'll just go into the dirt. So eventually it does get washed back into the pond,
Right.
but there are ways that you can make it. And then just feeding the animals properly. These animals are known for becoming obese. And I've seen several snapping turtles where people brought them to the shows and the turtle could barely fit into the shell. And that's just a sign of a really overweight turtle. And that's going to basically lead to the death of that animal by it being a like fatty liver disease or something like that. But next slide. This is kind of what they look like now. They're just kind of, I leave them overgrown. Sometimes I'll go in there and I cut the grass and I feed it to the other tortoises next to them. But just kind of leave it wild, overgrown. There's usually a branch or something in there for them to either climb out or, like I said, I do the cinder blocks in the bottom of it. Next slide. That's just 1.1. So the bigger one in there is a female. The smaller one is the male.
What size tank is that or tub is that? Is that 150?
Yeah, that's all. Yep. So I use that for a 1.1 group. Next. Just basically saying that they come from streams and ponds. You need to make sure that your closures don't get too much direct sunlight. These guys prefer it a little bit on the cooler side. If you've ever jumped in any of our springs here in Florida where they live, they're cold. These animals can handle the cold, but then they also do like to, when it comes to my commons and my Floridas, they do like to come out and they bask a little bit. What's really cool in my yard is if you do go out there, the snapping turtles are basically like trying to run up your leg to, get attention, to get food. I do a lot of where like I will feed fish off of tongs for them. And most of the turtles just associate me with food and good things. So they're always kind of running up to me. Next slide. Just very typically of a Florida snapper, you can see the spikes on the top of the head. The older they get, the less the spikes are there. I guess they just get worn off and break off here and there. Next. This is, yeah, keep in mind if you're going to do any kind of turtles outside, every year you'll see somebody put a really bad post out there on Facebook where they put their turtle or tortoise in the middle of the yard and they gave it an inch of mulch and then they wondered why it was dead in the afternoon. And it's like, well, it eats up to about, 100 and something outside in the middle there. And that 1 inch of mulch that you put in there really wasn't enough. But even if you had almost 6 inches of mulch, that sometimes isn't enough. So the shade cloth is something that you definitely need to do. I basically built my turtle enclosures around huge oak trees in my yard. And that just gives the turtles and tortoises places where they can come out and pick and choose where they want to be. But with the aquatic stuff, we've got to make sure that that water doesn't get too hot. So shade cloth is always good. You can even put extra branches. I've seen people cover their ponds with like palm fronds and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to help to keep them cooler. But by sinking them in the ground, that definitely also helps to keep them cooler. Next. Okay, so basically what I wanted to say with this one was that it's going to take longer for them to heat up in the ground versus them being above ground. Yeah, checking the water. I thought that was a really cute slide. I was like, I'm not sure I want to go in just yet. Let me check the temperature. Dips his fingers.
Do you have an issue with birds, with the small turtles?
No, but on occasion I do go out there and then I find a bunch of feathers on top of the water. And that means that
So the bird didn't make it?
Yeah, that the turtles kind of were tired of waiting for me to bring them fish, so they went with chicken instead. And that stuff. And I do find them like swimming with whole animals in their mouths. Just I kind of let them grow over like that. I'll go in there and I cut the grass. They don't need it to be pristined and mowed and manicured. They kind of like having a lot of stuff to tromp through. Next. Different setups that I've used over the years. In this setup, I've got that stand pipe, which only allows the water to get up to a certain amount of inches. And then there's a hole drilled in it so that it'll drain underneath. There is a Rubbermaid container that's in there that's filled with sand. On top of that cage, there's a piece of plywood to try and keep as much of the rain out of that bucket. This setup actually works really good for smaller turtles and stuff like that. So I do like stink pot setup like this. I do 3-stripe setup like this, and just a whole lot of other aquatic turtles. Next. Just a better view. The bricks and stuff like that, keep the Rubbermaid container out of the water. There's a hole drilled in that white pipe that only lets the water get up to so high. So when we get a lot of rain here in Florida, it kind of tends to flood out a lot of the enclosures. This is one way that you can kind of keep the water level at the same height all the time. And then I would rather them be swimming in rainwater than city water anyway. So this just works out really nice. Next.
What about during a hurricane? Do you have to bring them all in?
The tortoises I have brought in. The turtles, if they're in the ground, no, because they'll just stay in the water. I haven't had anybody like die or what you could tell like electrocution or anything like from lightning storms or anything like that. This is a North American wood turtle setup that I have. I really don't like those shallow woodland or not. What are they?
Lands.
The waterland tubs. They're just like shallow and they have a little tiny bump. They don't really work good for most animals. But when it comes to like the smaller turtles and stuff like that, these waterland tubs do work nice. They give you a land area and a water area. I do make these screen lids to keep predators from getting at the smaller turtles. Things that I've always been very fortunate about is my neighbors have always had tons of chickens. So I've always said if they ran out of chickens, I would run out and buy them some more chickens just to keep the predators over on their property and not in messing with the turtles. It's worked really well. You know, I can sit there and we can say that, it's like, well, I've got this fence, I've got a pit bull, I've got an AK-47, it's like I've got all this stuff. And I honestly, a lot of what it comes down to is the raccoons and possums and all that stuff are going to go after the chickens first. And, on occasion we'll have a hawk on the fence, and out by me, we can just go out the back door, shoot the gun one time in its general area, and then the bird flies off, so. Well, my concern is that a good sized hawk could fly off with a smaller
That's what I was
turtle
thinking,
or a
with
tortoise.
birds.
So that's why at the end of the day, that is going to keep a lot of stuff out by just having that hardware cloth screen lid on the enclosure. Next slide. Feeding. With any of our animals that we're working with in captivity, keeping their diets as mixed up as possible is definitely going to be the best way to go. When it comes to snapping turtles, next slide. I feed a bunch of different aquatic turtle foods. I also feed fish. My stepdad catches a lot of fish, and I've never had any issues with feeding like saltwater fish to freshwater turtles or vice versa or anything like that. So it's always worked out good to their benefits, because every time I go over to my parents' house, I usually have to bring a little cooler, and then I go home with 2 bags of fish, and I'll send my stepdad some pictures. Here's what your catch of the day went to, and it's cool because I am really getting to the point where my snapping turtles know if I like tap on the side of the enclosure, if they come up to the surface, that I'll give them a fish. And it's cognition, it's training. It's also going to make it so that I'm not throwing fish into the enclosure in the hopes that they eat them. If they don't eat it, then it'll foul up the water. The water gets fouled, the turtle gets sick. That's never a good thing. When it comes to like having to do water changes and stuff like that, if I fed them every day, once a day, I'd have to clean the enclosures a lot more than what I have to. But I'm trying to give them a healthy diet and keep the animals healthy themselves. So by keeping it mixed up and giving them the right amount of food is always important. When it comes to feeding any of your aquatic turtles, if you were using pellets, a lot of times what you do is you go in and you feed them 5 pellets. If he eats all 5 of the pellets, then you go back and you feed him 2.5 pellets, and then, maybe go back and feed him another 2.5 pellets. Then the next time you might start with like 8 pellets. You don't want to just go in there and throw 30 pellets of food and then say, okay, now I got to take 15 out because he only ate 15. That's also going to taint the water and mess it up that much quicker. So a lot of times you kind of start on the smaller end and then add a little bit. And then, when you see that they're no longer interested in eating, then you back off. Next slide. Bigger the turtle, the bigger the food item. Allie will get good sized grunts, which I tend to get a lot of. The smaller snapping turtles get smaller grunts or pinfish and stuff. This is something important too. This is the matamata, which is the equivalent of a South American snapping turtle. When it comes to feeding your animals store-bought fish, you have to be careful because they treat them with copper and different things for ick. And it's kind of like an accumulative type of poison where a fish that's only meant to live 3 years can handle that. But if you keep feeding the snapping turtles the same kind of fish from the same tank at the pet store all the time, you're going to build this up into a system, and then you could potentially poison your animal in the long run. So I prefer that you get some kind of live bearing fish and then just throw them in the ponds with a lot of your other turtles that don't eat a lot of fish. And you can kind of keep them going that way. Guppies are a great fish. Gambusia are another fish that are really good. They're live bearers, so they're constantly producing. I do try to keep in Allie's tank some fish. A lot of times he'll have tadpoles in there, and I'll actually feed the tadpoles to make sure that they stay in there because I don't want to have tons of mosquitoes in my yard. And if you're not changing the water and it sits for any amount of time, you'll get the mosquito larvae. So you need to have something in there that will clean up that kind of stuff in there. So fish are good, and then tadpoles are also really good for cleaning up mosquito larvae. Next. Again, this is just, there's actually probably about 10 little snapping turtles in that enclosure when this picture was taken. So that might be a lot of food for one little turtle, but that one little turtle will probably eat that much in one sitting. But as I said earlier, you want to kind of do everything with reason with these guys and not overfeed because they will get obese. And it's not good when the turtle does not fit inside a shell. Next. I, am constantly, feeding turtles and tortoises, at the same time. And I know that my snapping turtles love fruit. So when I was picking strawberries for 8 weeks straight, I would always throw a couple in with the snapping turtles and they would always be gone. So
Really?
yeah, yep. I know that a lot of North American wood turtles, box turtles, spotted turtles, supposedly bog turtles, which I've never really worked with, will eat cranberries and stuff like that. And all over the place where I grew up in Long Island, we had wild strawberries. And they were never grew to like the size of like a strawberry that you'd get at the grocery store, but maybe the size of your fingernail. They were just tiny little strawberries. And I'm sure that all the animals that live along the riverbanks would snack on them. So I didn't see any harm in, I would not feed, 10 of them like I would to a redfoot tortoise, but 1 or 2 strawberries to a snapping turtle is not going to be a bad thing. This is like one of those overfeeding pictures. Now, snapping turtles don't have a huge plastron to begin with, but you can see like in this picture that he can't pull his legs all the way in or anything like that. So this is really a fat little turtle. That's not what you want. Dennis is over here looking at his snapping turtle. He's actually, he's a good weight for his size. It's like the turtle fits the shell. And a lot of times what you'll see is you get a big turtle, but then it's a tiny shell, or you'll see a turtle shell where it's all like raised up in the back and it's like all flared out like it's a race car. And that's not the sign of a healthy tortoise. The shell's supposed to kind of like either be straight or pointing down. So next slide. Yes, you definitely make sure when you are putting your snapping turtles together that you can keep 2 girls together. You can keep a boy and a girl together, but don't try to keep 2 boys together. They will fight to the death like spur thighs and Herman's tortoises and a lot of other, animals. Males do not do well together. There's only going to be one in a certain amount of space. I had friends that in one river in North Florida, they would snorkel at night for them, and they would be able to find 150 snapping turtles or alligator snapping turtles in the 3 miles of this river that they would snorkel and go down.
Wow.
And basically, they were looking for them at the right time. And when they did actually give the alligator snapping turtle the protection that they did, all the studies that they did were done in the middle of the winter when the animals weren't active. They also did it during the day when the animals are inactive. So of course, you're not going to find animals if you're not looking for them in the ideal temperatures. And this is what actually gave them their protection now. I like the idea that they are protected, but I really feel that people should be able to keep these animals if they want, and especially like in rescue situations and stuff like that. Anywhere in the United States, you can own a snapping turtle except for California. And in, I want to say Louisiana, you can go into the meat market, so you can still get common snapping turtle meat and alligator snapping turtle meat. So they're killing them in some states, yet you can't own them in this state. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then in the way of like conservation and stuff like that, being that these animals are found in river systems and stuff like that, if you can't protect the river, you're not protecting the turtle. So it's a sad plight for a lot of turtles and tortoises in this world. And it's a lot of really bad legislation and a lot of bad conservation ideas. I love telling this story. There's a turtle called the Hamiltoni, which is a spotted wood turtle. And in India, where they come from, they're considered pretty rare. So Wayne Hill, who's a big turtle breeder in Winter Haven, he offered the Indian government 1,000 turtles. I'm going to ship them to you. Just release them back into the water. No, we don't want them. He reaches out to the equivalent of their FWC. I'm going to send you 1,000 turtles. Just release them back into the water. We don't want them. He reached out to the Gharial Society. We don't want them. Basically, if the turtles aren't considered rare in the wild, then they lose all their funding. You know, so it's like a lot of conservation these days is kind of geared towards them being able to say, oh, well, we need to protect these in the wild, so give us your money so that we can study them, we can do this and we can do that, instead of basically saying, here, we've got so many of these turtles that we've produced in captivity, we can now release them back into the wild in the hopes. And these would have been animals that had never been fed, never been handled, basically came out of the eggs and would have been shipped right to them. This isn't something that we're trying to head start or anything like that, you know, and it's just, it's sad that this is the kind of stuff that, you know, a lot of people don't realize. And, you know, it's not helping the animals by keeping them rare in the wild. Yeah, they'll breed throughout the year, but they typically lay eggs in and around now. This is why, like, if you see anything in the afternoons that's been hit by a car, I always go and check if it's dead. I check under the back legs to see if we can feel any eggs, because a lot of times if it's a female, they're out trying to look for a place to lay, or if it's a male, he was looking to go to a different pond to visit different girls. Just some more breeding.
You mark your turtles so you know who they are,
I don't have to, but I look at them like 20 times a day.
so you know the
Yeah.
differences.
Yeah, it would be like your iguanas. You know exactly who each one is, probably from the other side of the yard.
Right.
You know, so here's just a slide showing that they will sun themselves, especially when they're getting ready to lay their eggs. Not my slide. I did get a bunch of new slides, but I did not get a chance to add them. But this is a common snapping turtle laying eggs. They get it done pretty quickly. I have some tortoises that, you know, can take up to like 4 hours, where the snapping turtles, they come out, they find a place, they dig a hole, they're in and out of there in like, you know, an hour.
How many do they lay?
They can lay up to 30 eggs. Yeah. Their smaller eggs, probably if a quarter was round, it would be like even smaller than that. Probably more like a nickel size.
Wow.
Yeah, they're that small. So, but a lot of small eggs. And then when they come out, they're usually kind of folded in 3, and then they kind of fill out after they've been exposed to the air for a little bit. It's kind of crazy when you go out and I find the babies in with the parents just swimming around. I'm like, glad I feed my animals so heavy so that they don't eat all the babies.
They're carnivore, I mean, they eat.
Yeah, snapping turtles will eat other snapping turtles. Alligator snapping turtles, that's almost their favorite meal, is other turtles. So next slide. Just me digging up some eggs, or maybe not me, maybe Alex. Next slide. There's more eggs. Basically, I'm looking for kind of like fresh dug up area and stuff like that. And then when I see that, that's when I start to try and probe around. And usually you can tell because some of the dirt will be very hard, and that's when you know you're not into the egg. When you get into the softer dirt, that's when you're usually on top of the egg. And then if you're finding like leaf litter and grass and stuff like that, that the turtle obviously mixed up into the sand while they were, you know, digging the nest, that's also a tell that you're in the right place. Because if you have green grass and it's 2 inches under the dirt, then you know that that turtle had just finished nesting. So next slide.
How deep do they lay?
Not very deep, but it's also, I should say that they can probably dig a hole about 9 inches, but their eggs will be probably like maybe an inch under the surface. So they pretty much use that whole nest cavity. So depending on how big the animal is, will dictate how deep the eggs will be and how big the egg cavity will be. If it's some of my smaller females, they may only do 15 eggs. I think I've got like maybe 20 in the incubator from one clutch that I got about 2 weeks ago. But yeah, not very deep.
How long does it take before they hatch out?
They're pretty quick, so probably anywhere between like 60 and 90 days. I do tortoises, so that's, on average is like 4 months, and I've had some go up to a year.
Wow.
That's some of the monitors and stuff that I'm working with now. It's like 7 months, 9 months for the incubation. I'm like, that's going to be nerve wracking. It's the absolute worst when you get an egg and you know that it's going to be 4 months before you get to see that baby, or if the egg even hatches. Well, can you imagine doing 7 or 9 months? I incubate them in the house every chance that I get if I find them. I know that they're not my most expensive turtle, but I definitely want to give them the best chances. I do them at probably like 84 to probably like 86 is the high on doing that. You can see that they're on perlite. I do sink the eggs a little bit into the perlite, but I just don't want the eggs rolling around. So I don't feel that the container itself holds enough humidity in it that I don't have to kind of bury the eggs in it. This
Does
just
the
has.
temperature affect the sex of the turtles coming out?
It does, but I'm just going with the mid-range so I can produce the most amount of turtles. I'm not trying to produce boys versus girls. With a lot of that stuff, it's considered hot girls, cool boys. So hotter temperatures are going to produce your girls, cool temperatures are going to produce your boys. When you get babies, you get a lot of them at one time. It's not like, 1 or 2. It's usually you get 15 to 30 of them. Next. Yep. Some of them I produce, they always have that like white along the edge of their shells. I also tell people, if you raise your snapping turtle in a clear container like this, like a opaque one that they're in, versus a black container, you can actually influence the color of the turtle. So if you keep them in a white container, they will tend to be on the lighter side. If you put them in a dark container, they tend to be on the darker side. Next. If you want to have snapping turtles with perfect tails, you either have to separate them by themselves, or you have to kind of have like sphagnum moss or that Spanish moss that I get off of my oak trees. And if you put stuff like that in there for them to kind of climb around in, they're less likely to go after their siblings' tails. They're one of those species that it's very rare that you actually see adults coming out of the wild with full tails. And a lot of what it comes down to is everything thinks it's a worm and they bite onto it and the tips come off very easily. Next. As I was saying, this one was probably done in a lighter container, so it influenced his color to be on the lighter side. This one was being done in a darker container. They do have all different kinds of morphs out there. I don't know about the alligator snapper, but I know with like the commons and the Floridas and stuff like that, that there are hypos, pies, and different forms of albinism. But then and now, I wish that picture of me with the box turtle was better, but yeah, like I said, I've been into turtles and tortoises my whole life. Even as a kid, I knew that like every year we would find less and less box turtles because we used to go out and we would go on box turtle hunts. We would go out and we would go and do snake hunts, and we would try and collect all the box turtles that we could in the neighborhood, and we would put them all in my yard. And then by lunchtime, they would all be in the 10-acre woods behind my house. So we weren't keeping them, but even as a kid, I could say that growing up in Long Island, that we found less and less of them every year. And it was just So such a disappointment.
What was the name of that place?
Long Island, West Islip.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, but you know those New Yorkers. So, but the 10-acre woods that I played in is now, you know, a neighborhood. The school that I went to is, you know, gone. You know, so it's like it's just not the same. And there's no place for these animals anymore because everybody's yards are fenced in and stuff like that.
That's what's happening here.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yep. So it's unfortunate that, you know, I kind of feel that, you know, if we're not going to protect them in the wild, then we should be able to at least keep them in captivity so that we can actually keep them going. And there's a handful of animals that I can think of. Hamiltoni is a good one. There's one that was like going extinct in the wild. Kwangtung River turtles, through captive breeding, we've been able to keep them going. You won't find them in the wild at this point, but we do have them in captivity to the point of where if they ever wanted to, we could actually release these animals back into the wild. Obviously, it's important that the animals are kept pure, and I know a lot of the different Asian species of turtles can like interbreed and stuff like that, so you have to be careful, but it can be done, you know, and I think the way to go is through the private sector because, you know, a lot of these zoos and stuff like that, they have so many rules that they have to follow that, you know, if that animal is overrepresented in that, you know, bloodlines and stuff, they won't breed that animal anymore. You know, we're in captivity or, you know, in the private sector, we can do what we want and we're usually doing better and more for the animals and we usually figure it out first. So, but I think that's about it. Maybe one more. Yeah. I brought that guy back from South Florida. He was like one of the most beat up yellowfoot you ever saw, but he was pretty cool. And then he just climbed out of the box and just sat there the whole way home looking out at me. So next slide. Yeah, that's me. Like I said, there's some slides that I want to put into this talk, so maybe I'll do it again in another 2 years for the club again, and you'll see all the new stuff that I didn't get into this talk. My phone number is not right on there, but you can reach out to me through Facebook or any of the clubs and get a hold of me if you have any questions or if you're looking for any turtles or tortoises. Thanks everybody for joining in on this.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, how often do you feed your adult snapping turtles?
Probably like 2-3 times a week. Nice redfoot.
So my snapping turtle, I got a baby, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and now it's huge. I have it in way too small of a pond, but it disappeared for like 5 months over the winter. Do they estivate or?
They can, and I have seen that happen where they dig in about like 2 inches under the ground, and then they'll just stay there through the winter months.
Because he's just in he never comes up. He's just in a pond. So he would have just been in the mud at the bottom of the Rubbermaid.
There's lots of
He was
pictures
dead.
where they have like pictures of people sitting on the ice with snapping turtles underneath the ice that you can clearly see the turtle is walking underneath ice that's thick enough to hold a human like person. You know, so there's lots of pictures of stuff like that. Where the animals are known to be able to take in water through their cloaca and get oxygen out of it. So that's why they can stay under for as long as they do. And then you'd also have to imagine that if you're in that cold of water and in that much muck, that you're going to slow your heart down to 1 beat per minute, maybe 1 beat every 2 minutes. I don't know exactly how long, but you know, you're already talking about an animal that's made to stay underwater for, you know, a whole day. They dig into the mud all day long and then hang out in the mud, and then they come out at night. So they, you know, they're used to being underwater for hours and hours. So, but yeah, I don't see any problem with them being able to hide, you know, 4 months out of the year. Any other?
I've been feeding them chicken livers. Is that too fatty?
I would think so. I'd rather see you do some kind of like a store-bought fish.
Okay.
or something along those lines, or have somebody go out and catch some for you, or you catch it yourself.
Okay.
Just size appropriate.
Looks pretty fat.
It's too fatty of a food for them to really handle in their diet. I mean,
And how can you tell if it's male or female? I've been afraid to try to pull him out of there because he's pretty big, but is it the tail? Is it the length of the tail, basically?
it's the tail, and you almost want to have like either somebody that's done it a lot of times there to look at the animal, because if
Oh.
you have like a male and a female side by side, it's a lot easier than just having one, because it's how far the cloaca is from the base of the tail and then how thick it is before the tail. So
Okay. Thicker for males, further for males?
I want to say yes. I
In
almost
general?
have to look at mine.
Okay, thank you.
100% sure. But maybe at some point I'll post a picture of a male and a female underside to see if we can see a noticeable difference. But the long and the short is, if I have two of them next to each other, it's a lot easier for me to tell, the males from the females. Any other questions?
How would you rate the intelligence of snapping turtles versus other turtles?
They're pretty primitive, so most of their stuff, it's all instinctual, if that's the right word to use it. But they've been around for millions of years. I actually have a fossilized snapping turtle shell out of the Peace River, so they can say that they've been around for millions of years and they really haven't evolved. I would say out of all the turtles that are out there, the soft shells are still evolving, and they're probably one of the smartest. Where these guys, they know how to eat, they know how to hunt and do what they need to do. But if I had to like run an animal through a maze or something like that, I always said I would take a Reeves turtle. That's probably one of the smartest of the aquatic turtles that I work with. And that animal you could literally run through a maze, but these guys, I don't think that they're that evolved. They got to a certain point, they knew how to do everything they needed to do, and that was good enough for them. So, all right. Any other questions?
You want to tell them about this?
Yeah, all right. Well, Dennis brought his little snapping turtle
I'll
out
show
tonight.
them up here, put it in the
So,
picture.
we'll try and get him up there closer so everybody can see. We can see how savage he is. But that's actually a common snapper versus a Florida. Again, you don't see the spikes on the neck and the head that you would on a Florida, but because FWC couldn't tell the difference, they kind of just grouped them all together and made it into one turtle. Where if you were really into snapping turtles, especially here in Florida, you'd be able to see that we have one that almost looks kind of like a saddleback, and like a saddleback Galapagos tortoise, where the shell is kind of just really hokey and the neck is very long. But has everybody seen that little guy?
He's cute.
Yeah. But he's actually, he's a good weight and everything else. He can probably fit into a shell as much as he can, without too much issue. But well, you're taking the mic. All right. Anything else? All right.
I
Well,
got a long neck.
thanks for coming out.
Thanks, everybody, for coming out.
Yeah.
Zoom.